In the grim darkness of the far future, there are vessels that defy comprehension. Structures so vast that they could swallow entire cities whole. Machines so ancient that their origins are lost to the mists of time. Maintained by rituals half-remembered and prayers whose meanings have been forgotten. These are the battleships of the Imperial Navy, and to serve aboard one is to know a life that exists somewhere between honor and horror, between duty and damnation. Imagine, if you will, a structure 8 kilometers long, not 800 meters, not 8,000 feet, 8 full kilometers from bow to stern, a distance that would take you nearly 2 hours to walk at a brisk pace if you could somehow traverse it in a straight line. But there are no straight lines aboard an Imperial battleship. There are only corridors that twist and turn through the guts of the ship, like the intestines of some vast mechanical beast. Passages that climb and descend through dozens of decks, chambers so enormous that they generate their own weather patterns from the heat of the machinery and the breath of thousands of crew members. At its widest point, the vessel stretches 1.2 kilometers across, a city turned on its side and hurled into the void. The sheer mass of such a thing staggers the imagination. Billions upon billions of tons of ceramite, adamantium, and plasteel forged in the orbital shipyards above the greatest forge worlds of the Mechanicus. Some of these ships were laid down before the Imperium itself took its current form, their keels blessed by tech priests who have been dead for millennia, their hulls scarred by battles that no living soul remembers. To crew such a vessel requires not hundreds, not thousands, but anywhere from 25,000 to as many as 3 million souls, depending on the class of ship and which ancient records you choose to believe. These are not just numbers on a manifest or entries in a logbook. These are human beings, each with their own fears and hopes, their own dreams of glory or simple survival. They are pressed men, pulled from the underhives of distant worlds, volunteers seeking escape from lives of grinding poverty, criminals given one last chance at redemption, and children born in the depths of the ship who will live and die without ever seeing the sky of a planet. The architecture of these vessels speaks to a different aesthetic than the clean lines and efficient layouts you might expect from a military spacecraft. No, these are flying Gothic cathedrals, their exteriors adorned with gargoyles and buttresses, their interiors filled with vaulted halls where the sound of your footsteps echoes back at you from darkness above. Stained glass windows depict scenes from the Imperium's history, though many look out not upon landscapes, but into the absolute void of space. Statues of heroes and saints stand watch in alcoves, their stone eyes following you as you pass, and everywhere, there are the symbols of the Imperium, the aquila and the skull, the cog and the laurel. These ships are more than machines. They are traveling cities, self-contained worlds that must provide everything their inhabitants need to survive journeys that may last years or even decades. They are fortresses that must withstand the fury of alien weapons and the corrupting influence of the warp itself. They are weapons capable of reducing entire continents to molten slag, of destroying other vessels as large as themselves with broadsides that unleash more destructive power than 1,000 ancient atomic bombs. But they are also prisons. For the vast majority of those who serve aboard them, an Imperial battleship is a place from which there is no escape, no hope of transfer, no dream of shore leave or retirement. You are brought aboard through coercion or circumstance, and you remain until death claims you, whether that comes in the fury of combat, the slow attrition of exhausting labor, or the simple breakdown of a body pushed beyond its limits by the demands of service. The daily existence aboard such a vessel varies wildly depending on your station. At the pinnacle of the hierarchy sit the officers, men and women of noble birth or exceptional merit, who command from the bridge and dine in halls that would not look out of place in an imperial palace. In the middle ranks, you find the skilled specialists, the technicians and gunners and pilots whose expertise keeps the ship functioning. And at the bottom, in the lowest decks, where the light of the Emperor's regard seems dim and distant, labor the masses upon whose backs the entire edifice rests. The ratings and voidsmen, the indentured workers and bondsmen, those who shovel fuel and haul shells and scrub the filth from coolant systems. This is not a story of heroes and glory, though such things certainly exist aboard these ships. This is a story of the mundane and the horrific intertwined, of how ordinary people survive in extraordinary circumstances, of what it means to be a single soul among millions, a cog in a machine so vast that your individual contribution seems meaningless, even as it is utterly essential. In the pages that follow, we will explore every aspect of life aboard an Imperial battleship. We will walk the corridors from the opulent captain's quarters to the sweltering depths of the engine rooms. We will meet the navigator, locked in her sanctum, as she guides the ship through the madness of the warp, and the astropaths who send their minds screaming across the void to carry messages to distant worlds. We will stand beside the gunners as they service weapons the size of office buildings, and crouch with the bondsmen as they shovel corpse starch rations into their mouths during the brief minutes allowed for meals. We will come to understand that an Imperial battleship is not one thing, but many. It is a weapon. It is a home. It is a temple. It is a tomb. And for those who serve aboard, it is their entire world. A world that travels between the stars, but offers no escape from the brutal realities of the 41st millennium. The ship is waiting, the crew is at their stations. Let us step through the airlock and discover what it truly means to live aboard one of the Imperium's greatest and most terrible creations. The hierarchy, from throne to hold. Every Imperial battleship is a reflection of the Imperium itself, a microcosm of the vast, grinding bureaucracy that spans a million worlds. At its heart lies a rigid hierarchy, a ladder of rank and privilege that stretches from the highest officer on the bridge to the lowest bondsman shoveling ash in the furnace decks. This is not merely military organization. This is a feudal system recreated in steel and void space, where your position determines not just your duties, but your very worth as a human being. At the apex sits the captain, and aboard the largest battleships, this figure may be a Lord Admiral or Lord Captain, a man or woman whose authority aboard the vessel is absolute. They do not simply command the ship, they own it in a very real sense, holding ancient warrants and charters that make them masters of all who serve beneath them. The captain occupies quarters that would shame a planetary governor, suites of rooms that sprawl across entire sections of the command deck, bedrooms the size of small halls, offices lined with books and trophies from 100 campaigns, dining rooms where banquets are served on silver plate, while the ship's chef prepares delicacies transported at great expense from across the sector. The captain's authority is near absolute, limited only by the oversight of the fleet commissar and the expectations of Imperial Navy doctrine. They can promote or demote at will, dispense punishment ranging from extra duties to summary execution, and make tactical decisions that will seal the fate of thousands. In return for this power, they bear a crushing weight of responsibility. The loss of a battleship is not merely a military defeat. It is a catastrophe that may take centuries to rectify, for these vessels cannot be quickly replaced. The shipyards that birth them work on timescales measured in decades at best, and many battleships in service are older than the memory of anyone aboard them. Serving directly beneath the captain is a command staff that mirrors the structure of planetary nobility. The first officer, often called the executive officer or second in command, manages the day-to-day operations of the ship, while the captain focuses on strategy and command decisions. This is no small task. On a vessel crewed by hundreds of thousands, the mere coordination of shift changes and duty assignments requires a staff of dozens. The first officer must know the ship intimately, must understand the capabilities and limitations of every system, must be able to step into the captain's role at a moment's notice should death or injury claim the commander. The command deck itself houses a collection of specialized officers, each responsible for a critical aspect of the ship's operations. The Master of Ordnance oversees all torpedo tubes and attack craft, coordinating the efforts of deck crews who service the massive bombers and fighters stored in the launch bays. The Master Gunner maintains the macro cannon batteries and lance arrays, ensuring that the ship's primary weapons remain capable of unleashing the Emperor's wrath upon the enemies of mankind. These are not ceremonial positions. These are men and women who have dedicated their lives to understanding the intricacies of weapon systems that could level cities. Among the command staff, there are figures whose presence speaks to the unique nature of void warfare in the age of the Imperium. The navigator occupies a position of tremendous importance and equally tremendous isolation. This mutant psyker, marked by the third eye that allows them to perceive the currents of the warp, guides the ship through the nightmare realm of the Imperium. Navigators are not part of the normal chain of command. They belong to ancient noble houses that predate the Imperium itself, and they are contracted to serve aboard vessels rather than being pressed or enlisted like common crew. Their quarters reflect their status, sealed sanctums located near the ship's prow, where the navigator can extend their warp sight into the chaos ahead without endangering others with the terrible things they must witness. The astropathic choir represents another category of essential specialists. These psychers, their eyes burned from their skulls during the soul-binding ritual with the Emperor himself, serve as the ship's only means of faster-than-light communication. They occupy chambers deep within the vessel, spaces lined with psychically resonant materials and warded with hexagrammatic sigils to protect them from the entities that prowl the warp. When the ship must send or receive messages across the void, the astropaths gather in their choir, combining their limited powers to project or receive thoughts across light years of space. It is exhausting work that leaves them physically and mentally drained, and the mortality rate among astropaths is sobering. They burn out like candles, their minds consumed by the constant strain of touching the warp. The tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus form their own hierarchy within the ship's crew. The senior engineer, sometimes called the Master of the Forge, oversees all maintenance and repair operations. Beneath them serve dozens or hundreds of lesser tech adepts, each specializing in different systems, from the plasma drives that propel the ship to the void shield generators that protect it from enemy fire. The tech priests are not truly part of the Imperial Navy's command structure. They serve the Omnissiah, the machine god of Mars, and they are seconded to naval vessels as part of the ancient Treaty of Mars. This creates a complex dynamic, for while the captain commands the ship, the tech priests control access to much of its functionality. A captain who angers the senior engineer may find that critical repairs take much longer than they should, or that system failures occur at suspiciously convenient moments. The Master-at-Arms commands the ship's armsmen, the soldiers who defend against boarding actions and maintain internal security. On a vessel the size of a battleship, this force may number in the thousands, organized into companies and platoons that drill constantly in the corridors and holds. They are not Imperial Guard, those planet-bound soldiers who form the bulk of the Imperium's military might. They are void-born warriors, trained to fight in zero gravity, in corridors choked with smoke and fire, in the chaos of a ship torn open by enemy fire. The Master-at-Arms answers directly to the captain, but must also coordinate with the Master of Ordnance when organizing boarding parties to assault enemy vessels. The ship's chaplain, a representative of the ecclesiarchy, holds a peculiar position in the hierarchy. Technically, they have no direct command authority over the crew. In practice, their spiritual authority gives them tremendous influence. The chaplain conducts daily prayers and observances, leads the crew in hymns before battle, identifies potential heretics among the masses, and reminds everyone from the captain to the lowest bondsman of their duty to the God Emperor. A word from the chaplain can elevate a common rating to a position of trust, or consign an officer to investigation by the Inquisition. They move through the ship like a shadow of the Emperor's judgment, present at ceremonies and battles alike. The fleet commissar serves a similar but more martial purpose. Appointed by higher authorities in the Imperial Navy, the commissar ensures that discipline and morale remain strong. They have the authority to declare any member of the crew, up to and including the captain, unfit for service if they judge them incompetent or unreliable. This power makes the commissar simultaneously respected and feared. They are the human embodiment of the Imperium's willingness to sacrifice anything, including the lives of its own servants, in pursuit of victory. A commissar who believes the crew is wavering may execute malcontents in full view of their fellows as an example. A commissar who judges an officer's loyalty suspect may place them under arrest in the middle of a battle. Beneath this upper echelon of command, the hierarchy becomes more granular, but no less rigid. Lieutenants serve as the captain's deputies, each assigned to oversee specific ship systems. The lieutenant in charge of the astro-navigation section ensures that the ship's course is plotted correctly and coordinates with the navigator. The gunnery deck lieutenant manages the gun crews and maintains discipline among the thousands who service the macro cannons. These officers are often young men and women from noble or military families, serving their first tours of duty aboard capital ships as they learn the trade of void warfare. Below the lieutenants come the midshipmen, the absolute lowest rank of commissioned officer. These are students more than commanders, technically afforded an officer's respect, but still undergoing the grueling training that will transform them into true naval officers. Their duties are hands-on and educational, everything from leading small work parties to standing watch on the bridge during quiet shifts. Midshipmen are traditionally quartered somewhere in the midsection of the ship, far from both the luxurious command deck and the squalid lower decks, a physical reminder of their intermediate status. The warrant officers form the crucial link between the commissioned officers and the enlisted crew. These are men and women promoted from the ranks, given written warrants that elevate them above common ratings while keeping them below the commissioned ranks. A captain with even the most mutinous crew can keep the ship running as long as they can rely on their warrant officers. These individuals know the ship intimately, having worked their way up from the lowest positions, and they understand both the capabilities of the crew and the harsh realities of life in the depths. Warrant officers disseminate orders, ensure those orders are carried out, and maintain discipline through a combination of respect, earned through experience, and the liberal application of floggings when necessary. The ratings form the vast bulk of the crew, the tens or hundreds of thousands who perform the actual work that keeps the ship functional. These are the voidsmen, who maintain conduits and repair bulkheads, the gun layers who sight and fire the macro cannons, the loaders who haul shells the size of ground cars into the firing chambers. Every rating has a specific classification that defines their role, a designation like gun layer 3rd class or fuse changer 2nd class that places them within a Byzantine system of specializations and sub-specializations. Contrary to what one might expect, many ratings are actually volunteers. For those born on hive worlds, where existence is a daily struggle for survival, service in the Imperial Navy offers regular meals, steady pay, and the possibility of seeing something beyond the endless hab blocks of their birth. The conditions aboard a warship may be harsh, but they are often better than what these individuals left behind. Still, volunteers never fully meet a battleship's requirements, and this is where the press gangs enter the picture. A press gang, typically led by a young ensign and accompanied by a squad of armsmen, has the legal authority to conscript crew from any Imperial world the ship visits. They descend into the worst areas of cities, the places where the desperate and the criminal congregate, and they take what they need. Sometimes this is done in coordination with local authorities, who are happy to see their prisons emptied and their troublemakers removed. Other times, it is done with brutal efficiency, armed men seizing whoever they can catch and dragging them back to the ship in chains. Those taken by press gangs have no choice in the matter. Imperial law is explicit. A naval captain has the right to tithe crew directly from any planet, and there is no appeal, no process for those who wish to remain behind. Below, even the pressed ratings are the indentured workers and bondsmen, those unfortunate souls who rank below enlisted personnel. These are the people who were born aboard the ship, whose parents and grandparents served in the same capacity, creating dynasties of servitude that stretch back generations. They are criminals whose sentences have been commuted to lifetime service. They are refugees from worlds lost to Xenos invasions, given the choice between serving the ship or being cast into the void. They are the unlucky and the unwanted, and they perform the most dangerous and thankless work aboard the vessel. Bondsmen haul ammunition into weapon chambers during battle, their bodies straining under loads that would break an unaugmented human. They shovel fuel into the plasma furnaces that power the ship, working in heat so intense that their skin blisters even through protective gear. They clean the ventilation systems, crawling through spaces too small for servitors, breathing air thick with chemical fumes and industrial waste. They work 18-hour shifts, subsisting on meager rations of corpse starch and recycled water, sleeping on pallets in communal holds where privacy is a concept that has no meaning. The discipline imposed upon bondsmen is brutal beyond description. A warrant officer who judges their work inadequate may order floggings, confinement to even worse duties, or reduction of already pitiful rations. Protest is met with violence, rebellion with execution. The bondsmen are not slaves in the technical sense, for the Imperium officially forbids chattel slavery among its own people, but the distinction is largely academic. They are bound to the ship, they cannot leave, and they will never know anything but service until death releases them from their obligation. And below even the bondsmen, forming the absolute foundation of the ship's workforce, are the servitors. These are not true crew members. They are barely human, criminals and failed tech initiates whose personalities have been wiped away and replaced with basic programming. Cybernetic implants replace much of their organic tissue, turning them into biological machines capable of performing simple, repetitive tasks without rest or complaint. Servitors load cargo, maintain systems in the most hazardous environments, and perform calculations too complex for human minds, but too straightforward to require a full cogitator. They are another category of being entirely tools that happen to be made from human components, and they are treated with all the care and concern one would give to any other piece of equipment aboard the ship. This hierarchy is maintained through a combination of tradition, practical necessity, and overwhelming force. There is no democracy aboard an Imperial battleship, no suggestion box where crew members can voice their concerns. The chain of command is absolute, and to question it is to invite punishment. Yet for all its rigidity, the system works. Ships that have operated for centuries develop their own cultures, their own traditions, and ceremonies that bind the crew together, despite the vast differences in their stations. Officers who are wise recognize that they depend utterly on the competence and cooperation of those beneath them. Crew members who are fortunate find themselves serving under leaders who understand that loyalty born of respect is stronger than loyalty enforced through fear alone. But such wisdom is not universal, and many ships operate as floating dictatorships where the captain's word is law and the crew's suffering is simply the price of service. These vessels may function adequately during peaceful transit, but when crisis comes, when battle tests the bonds that hold the crew together, the cracks in their morale become fault lines that can shatter the entire edifice of order and discipline. The hierarchy of an Imperial battleship is a perfect reflection of the Imperium itself. Those at the top live lives of relative comfort and privilege, insulated from the worst horrors by layers of subordinates. Those in the middle navigate a careful path between the demands of their superiors and the needs of their subordinates, and those at the bottom suffer, enduring conditions that would break lesser men and women, sustained only by the knowledge that their service, however painful, is in the name of the God Emperor and the protection of mankind. Joining the crew, the many paths aboard. There are as many ways to find yourself serving aboard an Imperial battleship as there are stars in the sky, and few of them involve anything resembling choice. The great ships of the Imperial Navy do not recruit through advertising campaigns or appeals to patriotism. They take what they need when they need it, through methods that range from desperate volunteering to outright abduction. Understanding how the crew is assembled reveals much about the nature of the Imperium itself, an empire so vast and so desperate that it must constantly feed the grinding machinery of its military with an endless stream of human bodies. The volunteers are perhaps the easiest to understand, at least on the surface. These are individuals who present themselves at Imperial Navy recruiting stations, signing papers that will bind them to service for terms that may stretch 20 years or more. But to call them volunteers without qualification would be to misunderstand the context of their choice. Most who volunteer do so not out of desire to see the stars or commitment to the Imperial cause, but simply because life aboard a warship represents an improvement over the circumstances they are fleeing. Consider a young man born in the middle hive of Necromunda, where every day is a struggle to avoid being murdered by gangers or crushed in industrial accidents. Employment, if it can be found at all, means 16-hour shifts in manufactorums, where the air is thick with toxic fumes and the machinery has been known to eat workers who lack sufficient caution. Food is corpse starch supplemented with synthetic proteins that taste like industrial lubricant. Water is recycled through systems so old that it carries the metallic tang of corroded pipes. In such circumstances, the promise of regular meals, actual pay, and the chance to escape the hive entirely can seem like deliverance. The recruiting sergeant makes it sound almost appealing. 3 meals a day, guaranteed. Training in skills that will serve you for life. The chance to see worlds beyond your birth planet, to be part of something greater than yourself. What the sergeant does not mention, or mentions only in passing, are the conditions aboard ship. The brutal discipline, the danger of void combat, the likelihood that you will die far from home, your body either blasted into atoms by enemy fire, or, if you are fortunate, consigned to the ship's recyclers to feed your fellows. These details are not technically hidden, but neither are they emphasized during the recruitment process. Yet even understanding all this, thousands upon thousands make the choice to volunteer. For many, it truly is the best option available. A rating aboard a naval vessel at least has a function, a place in the hierarchy, protection from the casual violence that characterizes life in the worst sectors of Imperial society. They may die in service, but they will not starve in the streets or disappear into the darkness of an underhive settlement where no one will remember their names. The children born aboard ship represent another category of crew member entirely. These individuals never had a choice about their service because they never had a choice about their existence. Their parents served aboard the vessel, and they were born in the same corridors they will likely die defending. Growing up aboard a battleship creates a unique perspective. These children know nothing of planetary life, have never felt wind on their faces or rain on their skin. The corridors and chambers of the ship are their entire world, and the void beyond the hull is not an absence to be feared, but simply the natural state of the universe. Such individuals are prized by the officers who command them, for they understand the ship in ways that newcomers never truly can. They know which passages flood during certain maneuvers, which bulkheads groan most loudly under stress, which sections tend to be warmer or cooler based on their proximity to heat exchangers and cooling systems. They can navigate in near total darkness, feeling their way through passages they have traversed since childhood. They speak their own dialect, a variant of Low Gothic mixed with ship's cant and technical jargon that can be almost incomprehensible to outsiders. The life of a shipborne child is not easy. They begin working as soon as they are old enough to be useful, typically around age 8 or 9 by Imperial standard reckoning. Their tasks are initially simple: carrying messages, helping to clean spaces too small for adult workers, assisting in the endless maintenance that keeps a ship of this size operational. As they grow, so do their responsibilities, until by their mid-teens, they are full members of the crew, working the same brutal shifts as everyone else. Education for these children is rudimentary at best. They learn to read and write enough to follow written orders and maintain basic logs. They learn the prayers and catechisms that are part of daily life aboard an Imperial vessel. They learn whatever technical skills are necessary for their assigned roles. But broader education, the kind that might allow them to question their circumstances or aspire to something beyond their station, is not provided. The Imperium does not need philosophers among its ratings. It needs obedient workers who will perform their duties without complaint until death claims them. Then there are the pressed men and women, those taken by force to fill gaps in the crew roster. Press gangs operate under ancient Imperial law that grants naval captains the authority to conscript crew as needed. When a ship arrives at a port world and finds itself under strength, the press gangs descend and Emperor help anyone caught in their path. The process is coldly efficient. An ensign, typically young and eager to prove themselves, leads a squad of armsmen armed with shock mauls and shotguns into the lower levels of whatever city the ship is visiting. They target areas where the local authorities have minimal control, places where the disappearance of residents will not cause too much trouble. Sometimes they coordinate with the local Adeptus Arbites, who are happy to clear out criminal elements. Other times, they simply take whoever they can catch. The people taken by press gangs come from every imaginable background. Criminal gangers find themselves pressed into service alongside Hab block laborers, prostitutes seized from the street alongside former merchants who have fallen on hard times, political dissidents, religious malcontents, those who have simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. All are suitable for service in the Imperial Navy. Their previous crimes or status matter little once they are aboard. What matters is whether they can be broken down and rebuilt into crew members who will follow orders. The first days aboard ship for a pressed crew member are a particular kind of hell. They are stripped of their possessions, their clothing replaced with standard issue fatigues bearing the ship's insignia. They are subjected to medical examinations that are less about ensuring their health and more about determining what work they are capable of performing. Those found to be strong and healthy are assigned to the most physically demanding roles. Those with useful skills may find themselves in somewhat better positions, and those who resist or attempt escape serve as examples. Their punishment, public and brutal. The breaking process is deliberate. The pressed crew are worked to exhaustion, fed barely enough to sustain themselves, subjected to constant supervision by warrant officers who will tolerate no dissent. They are indoctrinated in the basic elements of Imperial faith and ship's discipline. They learn, quickly and painfully, that their old lives are over, that resistance is futile, and that their only choice now is between grudging cooperation and death. Some never adjust. These unfortunates find 1,000 ways to die aboard a battleship. They may fall into machinery that they have not yet learned to navigate safely. They may be killed during training exercises, judged too slow or too clumsy to serve effectively. They may simply give up, refusing to eat or work until death takes them. The ship keeps no special accounting of these losses. They are noted in the daily casualty reports alongside those killed by more conventional causes, and their bodies are processed like any other dead crew member. But most, eventually, adapt. The human capacity for survival is remarkable, and even those who began their service in chains can come to find a kind of purpose in the routine. It is not happiness, certainly. It is not the life they would have chosen, but it is life, and that is more than many alternatives offer in the Imperium of man. Then there are the criminals, those whose sentences have been commuted from execution or imprisonment to lifetime service aboard naval vessels. The Imperium's justice system is harsh beyond measure, with crimes ranging from theft to heresy punishable by death. But the Navy is always hungry for crew, and a criminal's life sentence can be served just as well aboard a warship as in a penal colony. These individuals are marked, their previous crimes noted in their records, and they are watched carefully by the armsmen and warrant officers. They are given the most dangerous and unpleasant assignments, places where their deaths would be regrettable, but not catastrophic to the ship's operations. Some of these criminal crew members were guilty of their accused crimes. Others were not, victims of corrupt local authorities or simply convenient scapegoats for problems that needed solving. Aboard the ship, it matters little. They are all treated the same as individuals whose past failures must be redeemed through service to the Imperium. Those who serve well may eventually earn a kind of redemption, their past crimes, if not forgotten, then at least set aside. Those who do not serve well simply die sooner than they might have otherwise. There are also the refugees, those taken aboard when their worlds fall to xenos, invasion, or chaos corruption. When a planet can no longer be defended and evacuation becomes necessary, the Imperial Navy does not have the capacity to save everyone. The ships that arrive to evacuate a doomed world can carry only a fraction of the population, and those taken aboard often find that they have traded one form of suffering for another. They are distributed among the crew quarters, given work to justify their continued consumption of resources, and told that they should be grateful for the Emperor's mercy in granting them even this chance at survival. The integration of new crew members, regardless of how they arrived aboard the ship, follows certain patterns. They are assigned to work parties overseen by experienced ratings or warrant officers who will teach them their duties while ensuring they do not cause problems. They are housed in communal quarters where they will be watched by their fellow crew members, making it difficult for them to cause trouble without being reported. They are required to attend daily prayers and observances, where the chaplain will reinforce the message that they serve the God Emperor, that their suffering has purpose, that their sacrifice is meaningful. Over time, if they survive, they begin to be accepted as part of the ship's crew. They learn the informal rules that govern life aboard the vessel, the traditions and superstitions that bind the crew together. They develop relationships with their fellow workers, forming bonds forged in shared hardship. They may even begin to take a kind of pride in their service, to feel that they are part of something larger than themselves. But they never truly escape the circumstances of their recruitment. Those who were pressed will always know that they were taken against their will. Those born aboard will always be limited by their lack of experience with anything beyond the ship's bulkheads. Those who volunteered may come to regret their choice, but by then, it is far too late to change their minds. And the ship does not care about their feelings on the matter. The ship needs crew, and it has them, and that is the only calculation that matters. The accumulation of crew over time creates a complex social structure aboard the ship. Veterans who have served for decades hold informal power based on their experience and knowledge. New arrivals must navigate not just the official hierarchy, but also the unwritten rules of crew culture. Friendships form, rivalries develop, and occasionally something like romance blooms in the rare moments when crew members have both privacy and energy enough to pursue it. But underlying all of this is the fundamental reality that no one aboard the ship, except perhaps the highest-ranking officers, is there entirely by choice. They are there because the Imperium needs them, and the Imperium's needs always supersede the desires of individuals. The great battleships of the Imperial Navy are crewed not by volunteers eager to serve, but by those who had no better options, and that truth shapes every aspect of life aboard these vessels. The Navigator and warp travel, guiding through madness. In a galaxy where conventional travel would take centuries to cross even modest distances, the ability to traverse the warp is what makes the Imperium possible. Without faster-than-light travel, there could be no galaxy-spanning empire, no coordination between distant worlds, no hope of responding to threats before they consume entire sectors. And at the heart of this capability, aboard every warp-capable vessel, sits a figure both essential and terrifying: the navigator. Navigators are not like other crew members. They are not pressed into service or born aboard ship. They are mutants, their bloodlines carefully maintained by ancient noble houses that predate the Imperium itself. The mutation that makes them navigators is the result of genetic manipulation performed during the dark age of technology, creating a strain of humanity capable of perceiving the warp without immediately going insane or being possessed by the entities that dwell there. But this capability comes at a terrible cost. Navigators are marked by their gift, bearing physical deformities that make them instantly recognizable, most notably the third eye that grows in the center of their foreheads, the warp eye that allows them to see into the immaterium. From birth, navigators are raised within their houses, trained in the arts of warp navigation, and schooled in the political complexities of dealing with Imperial authorities. The houses are incredibly wealthy, their monopoly on warp navigation giving them leverage over everyone from merchant princes to lord commanders. A navigator house can make or break trade routes, determine which military campaigns receive priority support, and accumulate fortunes that rival those of entire planetary governments. In return for this power and wealth, they provide the Imperium with the one thing it absolutely cannot function without: the ability to travel between the stars. When a navigator is assigned to a battleship, they come aboard with a contract that specifies their pay, their accommodations, and their authority. Unlike other crew members, a navigator can leave if their contract is not honored, or if they judge the ship too dangerous to continue serving. This gives them a degree of independence that no one else aboard enjoys, save perhaps the captain themselves. Yet this independence is balanced by absolute dependence in another sense. Without a navigator, the ship cannot safely traverse the warp, and the captain knows it. This creates a delicate balance of power, a mutual dependence that colors every interaction between the navigator and the command staff. The navigator's quarters are located near the ship's prow, in chambers specifically designed to facilitate their unique abilities. These are not merely sleeping quarters, but rather sanctuaries built according to ancient principles that take into account the psychic dimensions of space. The walls are lined with materials that resonate with the warp in specific ways, creating a space where the navigator can extend their warp sight without as much of the usual psychic backlash. Heavy doors seal the chambers, both for the navigator's protection and for the safety of anyone who might accidentally glimpse them when they open their third eye. Inside these chambers, the navigator has a degree of luxury that matches or exceeds even that of the senior officers. Comfortable furniture, personal attendants to see to their needs, libraries filled with charts and tomes that document the currents and eddies of local warp space. But for all this comfort, the navigator's life is fundamentally one of isolation. They cannot freely move about the ship, for their appearance would cause disquiet among crew members not trained to deal with obvious mutants. They take their meals alone or in the company of other sanctioned psychers who will not be disturbed by their nature. They spend long hours in meditation and preparation, steeling themselves for the ordeal that is warp navigation. When the ship prepares to enter the warp, the navigator is summoned to the navigation blister, a reinforced chamber that extends from the ship's bow like a crystalline growth. This chamber is perhaps the most important single point on the entire vessel, for from here, the navigator will guide them through the nightmare realm of the Immaterium. The blister's walls are composed of specially treated transparent materials, allowing the navigator to gaze directly into the warp once the ship translates from real space. The translation itself is a violent process. The ship must first travel to the system's Mandeville point, the minimum safe distance from a star where the pull of gravity is weak enough to allow entry into the warp without catastrophic consequences. Once there, the warp engines activate, tearing a hole in reality itself. The ship surges forward into the breach, and suddenly the orderly laws of physics give way to the madness of the warp. What the navigator sees when they open their third eye defies description in any conventional sense. The warp is not a place in the way real space is a place. It is a realm where the thoughts and emotions of living beings take on physical form, where the past and future exist simultaneously, where distance and direction are concepts that shift and change with no warning. To perceive it without protection is to invite instant madness or worse. But the navigator's mutation allows them to filter what they see, to find patterns in the chaos, to identify the currents and tides that the ship can ride to reach its destination. The Astronomicon serves as the navigator's primary reference point, a psychic beacon projected from Terra by the will of the Emperor himself and powered by the sacrifice of thousands of psychers. From the navigator's perspective, the Astronomicon appears as a brilliant light in the Belhom's woods, darkness, steady and true, while everything else shifts and writhes. By keeping this light in view and using it to triangulate their position, the navigator can plot a course through the warp that will, if all goes well, bring the ship to its intended destination in real space. But warp travel is never safe, and even the most skilled navigator cannot guarantee success. The warp is home to entities, beings of pure psychic energy that hunger for the souls of mortals. Demons prowl the currents, drawn to the psychic signatures of ships like sharks to blood in water. Some are mindless predators, things of instinct and hunger. Others possess terrible intelligence, serving the chaos gods in their eternal war against reality itself. These entities cannot breach the Geller field directly, the bubble of real space that the ship projects around itself, but they can influence the currents, creating false paths that lead ships astray, or generating storms that can delay a voyage by days or weeks or even years. The navigator must watch for these dangers constantly. A current that seems to flow in the right direction may be a trap, leading the ship into a dead end where demons wait to tear at the Geller field until it fails. A calm patch of warp space may be the eye of a forming storm, one that will scatter the ship across light years if they are caught in it. Strange lights flicker in the depths, and the navigator must judge whether each is a landmark they can use, or a lure designed to draw them toward destruction. The strain of this constant vigilance is immense. Hours stretch into days as the navigator maintains their vigil, their third eye open and perceiving horrors that would drive a normal human immediately insane. They cannot rest, cannot look away, for even a moment's inattention might send the ship off course or allow some horror to approach unnoticed. The rest of the crew goes about their duties, sleeping and eating and maintaining the ship's systems, but the navigator remains at their post, suspended in a state between waking and dreaming, their consciousness stretched thin across the boundary between real space and the warp. The Geller field, which protects the ship during warp transit, is not truly the navigator's responsibility. It is maintained by the tech priests and their servitors, a massive piece of technology that projects a bubble of normal space-time around the vessel. Within this bubble, the laws of physics continue to function as they do in real space. Outside it, the warp howls and churns, trying constantly to breach the barrier and flood the ship with its madness. The Geller field is not impenetrable. It can be weakened by prolonged exposure to warp storms, by damage to the generators, by sabotage from cultists or possessed crew members. When the field flickers or fails, even for an instant, the results are catastrophic. Demons pour through the breach, materializing in corridors and chambers where moments before there had been nothing. Crew members are possessed, their bodies taken over by warp entities that use them as weapons against their fellows. The very structure of the ship can be corrupted, metal warping into organic shapes, bulkheads sprouting eyes and mouths and tentacles. The navigator can sense when the Geller field weakens, can feel the attention of the entities beyond focusing on the ship with greater intensity. In such moments, they must make terrible decisions. Do they press on, hoping the field holds long enough to reach their destination? Do they attempt to translate back into real space, risking the ship emerging far off course or even centuries off their intended time? There is no good answer, only choices that trade one kind of risk for another. Even successful warp journeys exact a toll on the navigator. The constant exposure to the warp leaves psychic scars, memories of things seen that cannot be forgotten. Navigators who serve for decades often develop strange quirks and phobias, behavioral tics that mark them as damaged by their service. Some become paranoid, seeing signs of corruption everywhere. Others retreat into themselves, speaking less and less until they communicate only through written notes or telepathic impressions. The most unfortunate simply burn out, their minds overwhelmed by the accumulation of warp exposure until they can no longer function as navigators. When a navigator burns out or dies, the ship faces a crisis. Without a navigator, extended warp travel becomes impossibly dangerous. The ship can make short, blind jumps of only a few light years at a time, relying on cogitator calculations rather than active guidance. Such jumps are made with the understanding that the ship might emerge light years off course, or decades in the future or past, or not at all. For a military vessel on campaign, the loss of a navigator can end the mission, forcing the ship to return to port to seek a replacement. The relationship between a navigator and their ship is complex. They are not part of the crew in the conventional sense, but neither are they simply contractors providing a service. Over time, a navigator develops an intimate knowledge of their vessel, learning its quirks and tendencies in the warp, understanding how it responds to different kinds of warp currents. A ship handled by an experienced navigator will fare better in the warp than one with a novice at the helm, not because the novice lacks skill, but because they lack this accumulated familiarity. Navigators rarely interact with the common crew. Their mutation marks them as different, as other, and even crew members who understand intellectually that the navigator is essential to their survival may feel uncomfortable in their presence. The third eye, even when closed and hidden, seems to draw attention, making people feel watched and judged. As a result, most navigators live in relative isolation, their contact with the crew limited to official communications with the captain and necessary interactions with those who maintain their quarters and see to their needs. Yet for all their isolation and the terrible nature of their duties, most navigators take pride in their work. They are the only ones who can safely guide ships through the warp. They are the ones who make interstellar travel possible, who keep the Imperium connected across impossible distances. Without them, humanity would be confined to individual solar systems, unable to coordinate responses to threats, unable to maintain the trade and communication that hold the Imperium together. This knowledge sustains them through the long watches in the navigation blister, through the psychic toll of constant warp exposure, through the isolation of their existence aboard ship. The warp journey's end comes when the navigator guides the ship to the warp translation point nearest to their destination. The ship re-enters real space in a burst of energy that ripples across local space, announcing its arrival to anyone with the senses to detect it. The navigator's third eye finally closes, and they slump in exhaustion, their duty complete for now. They are escorted back to their quarters, where they will rest and recuperate until the next journey begins. The hours or days or weeks they spent guiding the ship through the warp may have translated to entirely different durations in real space, time being fluid and uncertain in the immaterium. They may find on arrival that they are years early or late, that circumstances at their destination have changed beyond recognition, or that they have arrived exactly when planned. The warp gives no guarantees. What is certain is that without the navigator, the journey would have been impossible. And so they are valued, even as they are isolated. They are protected, even as they are feared. They are essential, even as their very existence is a reminder that humanity must bargain with mutation and psychic power to survive in a hostile galaxy. The navigator is perhaps the perfect symbol of the Imperium itself: necessary, troubled, dangerous, and absolutely irreplaceable. The astropaths, voices across the void. If the navigator is the ship's eyes in the warp, then the astropaths are its voice, its only means of communication across the vast distances that separate one star system from another. In an empire spanning millions of worlds, where the closest neighboring systems may be light years apart, conventional communication is useless. A radio transmission sent from one world would take years or centuries to reach its destination, arriving long after whatever crisis prompted the message had passed. The Imperium's solution to this problem is the astropath, sanctioned psychers, whose telepathic abilities allow them to project their thoughts through the warp itself, achieving in moments what physical signals could never accomplish. Astropaths are created through one of the most harrowing rituals in the Imperium, a process known as soul binding. Gathered by the black ships of the Inquisition, from across the galaxy, potential astropaths are brought to Terra in groups of 100. These are psychers judged strong enough to be useful, but not so powerful that they present an immediate threat of possession or corruption. On Terra, they are brought before the Golden Throne itself, into the physical presence of the Emperor of mankind. What happens next is an experience that defies human comprehension, a psychic connection between the Emperor's vast consciousness and the fragile minds of the assembled psychers. The soul binding burns out the physical eyes of every astropath who survives it, leaving empty sockets where once there were eyes. This is not an accident, but rather a necessary consequence of the ritual. The Emperor's psychic might is so overwhelming that mortal flesh cannot withstand direct exposure. The eyes, as windows to the soul, bear the brunt of this cosmic force. But what is taken in flesh is returned in spirit. The soul binding grants the astropath a direct connection to the Emperor's will, a piece of his power that strengthens their minds and helps protect them from the demons and perils of the warp. This protection is not absolute, but it is vastly greater than what an unsanctioned psyker might possess. Not all of those brought before the Golden Throne survive the soul binding. Many die during the ritual, their minds shattered by forces they cannot comprehend. Others emerge alive but broken, their personalities destroyed, or their sanity fragmented beyond recovery. But those who do survive, who come through the ordeal intact and sane, become astropaths, joining a brotherhood of blind seers whose service is absolutely essential to the functioning of the Imperium. Aboard a battleship, the astropaths form what is called a choir, typically numbering anywhere from 3 to a dozen individuals, depending on the size and importance of the vessel. They are led by a choir master telepathica, an astropath of particular skill and experience who coordinates their efforts and serves as the primary liaison with the ship's command staff. The choir chambers are located deep within the vessel, in sections heavily shielded and warded against psychic interference. The walls are inscribed with hexagrammatic sigils, ancient symbols that help contain psychic energy and protect against demonic intrusion. The very geometry of the chambers follows principles that most crew members could not articulate, angles and proportions chosen for their resonance with the warp rather than any conventional architectural logic. The daily life of an astropath is one of routine, punctuated by moments of intense psychic exertion. When not actively sending or receiving messages, they spend their time in meditation, strengthening their mental defenses and maintaining the psychic discipline that keeps them safe from the entities that prowl the warp. They participate in training exercises, practicing the techniques that allow multiple astropaths to combine their powers into something greater than the sum of its parts. They study the arcane texts that document the metaphoric and symbolic language through which astropathic messages are transmitted. For astropaths do not communicate in simple words or images. The warp does not carry literal information in the way that radio waves or light might. Instead, astropathic messages are composed of psychic impressions, emotions, and symbolic representations that must be interpreted by the receiving astropath. A message about an enemy fleet approaching might be transmitted as a feeling of overwhelming dread, combined with images of predatory beasts circling prey. A request for reinforcements might manifest as a psychic cry of desperation, a drowning man reaching for a rescuer. The more skilled the astropath, the more complex and precise the symbolic language they can employ. But even the best astropathic communication is subject to misinterpretation and error. When the ship needs to send a message, the process is exhausting for all involved. The astropaths gather in the primary choir chamber, arranging themselves in a formation that has been refined through long practice. They link minds, each lending a fraction of their power to create a gestalt entity capable of projecting thoughts across vast distances. The choir master takes the message from the captain or communications officer, a literal transcription of what needs to be communicated, and begins the process of translating it into the psychic language that can be transmitted through the warp. The actual transmission is a moment of terrible vulnerability. The astropaths open themselves to the warp, projecting their combined consciousness into the immaterium like a beacon. They feel the message taking shape, see it in their mind's eye as a construct of thought and emotion and symbolism, and then they cast it forth, hurling it into the warp tides with all the psychic force they can muster. In that moment, they are exposed to every horror the warp contains. Demons, always hungry for psyker souls, surge toward the psychic light of the transmission. The astropaths must maintain their focus even as they feel claws scraping at the edges of their consciousness, whispers promising power or pleasure, if they will only open themselves a little more, a little further. The soul binding protects them, the Emperor's light within their spirits acting as a shield, but that protection is not impenetrable. Astropaths have been pulled from their bodies during transmissions, their minds devoured by the things that dwell in the warp, while their physical forms slump like discarded puppets in the choir chamber. Even successful transmissions exact a terrible toll. The astropaths emerge from the link exhausted, sometimes to the point of collapse. Blood drips from their empty eye sockets, psychic stigmata manifesting on their flesh in the form of burns or strange markings. They must be helped to their quarters, where they will rest for hours or days, depending on the intensity and duration of the transmission. During this recovery period, they are vulnerable, their psychic defenses weakened, and they must be carefully watched to ensure that nothing has followed them back from the warp. Receiving messages is somewhat less strenuous but no less critical. Astropaths maintain a constant passive watch, their minds open to the possibility of incoming transmissions. When a message arrives, it manifests as a sudden intrusion, foreign thoughts and images flooding into their consciousness. The receiving astropath must quickly capture these impressions, holding them steady long enough to interpret their meaning and translate them back into conventional language. This interpretive process is an art as much as a science. Two different astropaths receiving the same message might translate it in slightly different ways, emphasizing different aspects of the symbolic content. A message intended to convey urgency might be interpreted as panic or merely concern, depending on the receiver's state of mind and personal experiences. This introduces an unavoidable element of uncertainty into astropathic communication, a fuzziness that stands in stark contrast to the precise coordination that modern warfare requires. Naval commanders must learn to work with this uncertainty, to plan operations that account for the possibility that messages have been misunderstood or delayed or simply lost in the warp's chaos. For messages can be lost. Not every astropathic transmission reaches its destination. The warp is not a reliable medium. Storms can disrupt transmissions, scattering psychic energy before it reaches its intended recipient. Demons can intercept messages, corrupting them, or simply devouring the psychic energy they contain. Distance degrades transmission quality, messages sent across multiple sectors becoming increasingly garbled and difficult to interpret. The astropaths do what they can to ensure clarity, but there are limits to what is possible. This unreliability creates constant anxiety for ship commanders. A critical message sent might not arrive for days or weeks, if at all. Orders from Fleet Command might be intercepted or delayed, leaving ships operating on outdated information or forced to use their own initiative in situations where coordination was expected. The astropaths themselves live with the knowledge that their failures can have catastrophic consequences, that a message lost or misinterpreted might doom entire worlds. The physical and psychic strain of astropathic service means that most astropaths die relatively young, certainly far younger than their counterparts who were judged unsuitable for astropathic training and sent instead to other roles. The constant exposure to the warp, even filtered through the protection of the soul binding, leaves marks on body and spirit alike. Astropaths develop strange quirks and ailments. Some experience phantom sensations, feeling touches, and hearing sounds that have no physical source. Others suffer from precognitive dreams or visions, seeing fragments of possible futures, but unable to distinguish them from waking imagination. The eldest astropaths often seem to drift halfway between the material world and the warp, present in body but distant in spirit, as if some part of them has already crossed over into that other realm. Yet for all the hardship and danger, astropaths generally take pride in their service. They are not like the psykers fed to the Golden Throne to power the Astronomicon. Their souls consumed in a matter of days or weeks. They are not like the untrained and unsanctioned psykers hunted by the Inquisition, living in fear of discovery and execution. They are sanctioned, trained, valued members of the Imperium's vast apparatus, and their skills are indispensable. Without astropaths, there would be no way to coordinate fleets across light years of space, no means of calling for aid when disaster strikes, no method of maintaining even the fiction of a unified Imperium spanning the galaxy. The relationship between astropaths and the rest of the ship's crew is complicated by their nature as sanctioned psykers. Everyone knows what they are, knows that they bear the witch mark, knows that they can touch the warp in ways that would destroy a normal human. This knowledge breeds fear and suspicion, even among crew members who understand intellectually that the astropaths are necessary and loyal servants of the Imperium. Most crew avoid the choir chambers if they can, uncomfortable with the thought of being near such concentrated psychic activity. The astropaths themselves often prefer this isolation, finding that the presence of too many unshielded minds can be overwhelming to their psychic senses. Like the navigator, astropaths are accorded a degree of respect and accommodation that ordinary crew members never receive. They have their own quarters, private rooms, rather than communal dormitories, spaces where they can retreat from the constant psychic noise of thousands of minds pressed together in the ship's confines. They are excused from most of the general labor that occupies the rest of the crew, their time dedicated to maintaining their abilities and their readiness to serve. They eat better food, not luxuriously, but at least nutritiously. For an astropath weakened by malnutrition is an astropath less able to resist the dangers of their calling. When battle comes, the astropaths play a role that is invisible to most of the crew, but absolutely critical. They send constant updates to Fleet Command or other ships in the formation, reporting the battleship's status, damage sustained, enemy forces engaged. They receive tactical intelligence and new orders, relaying them to the bridge even as weapons fire rocks the ship and damage reports flood in from every section. In the chaos of void combat, where sensor readings can be jammed or spoofed, and visual, observation is limited to what can be seen through reinforced viewports. Astropathic communication may be the only reliable way to coordinate with allied forces. The astropaths also serve another, darker purpose during battle. When the ship takes catastrophic damage, when it becomes clear that destruction is imminent, the astropaths will attempt one final transmission. They will gather whatever strength remains to them and send a last message into the void, a final report of what happened and why. These death screams, as they are sometimes called, are often garbled and incomplete, the psychic equivalent of a transmission cut off mid-sentence. But they provide intelligence that might be crucial for understanding enemy tactics or locating lost ships. They are the ship's last gift to the Imperium, purchased with the lives of the astropaths who make the sacrifice. In the rare times when astropaths have leisure, they often gather together, finding comfort in the company of those who share their burden. They tell each other stories, not with words, but with direct mind-to-mind contact, sharing experiences and memories in ways that no conversation could match. They play psychic games, gentle exercises that keep their skills sharp, without the risk of full warp exposure. They pray, not with the rote recitations common among the crew, but with genuine devotion, thanking the Emperor for the protection he provides and asking for continued strength to serve. For in the end, that is what drives them. The knowledge that they serve the Emperor, not just in abstract principle but in literal fact, having stood in his presence and received his blessing. Every message they send successfully, every communication that arrives where it was intended, is another small victory against the chaos that threatens to tear the Imperium apart. They are the invisible threads that tie together the vast fabric of human civilization across the stars, and they bear this burden with as much grace as mortal flesh can manage. The Tech Priests. Keepers of the machine spirit to the uninitiated, the machinery aboard an Imperial battleship might seem no different from any other complex technological system. Engines that must be maintained, weapons that must be serviced, systems that must be monitored and repaired when they malfunction. But those who truly understand the nature of Imperial technology know that this is dangerously incomplete. The machines are not mere assemblages of metal and circuitry. They are host to machine spirits, fragments of the Omnissiah's divine essence that reside within every technological creation and must be properly appeased if they are to function reliably. The tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus are the keepers of this sacred knowledge, and their presence aboard an Imperial battleship is not simply practical, but absolutely essential. Without them, the ship would quickly deteriorate into a mass of non-functional systems, the machine spirits growing angry and uncooperative without the proper rituals and prayers. The senior engineer, ranking tech priest aboard the vessel, holds a position of tremendous power, second in practical authority only to the captain themselves, and in some ways equally important. The tech priests are immediately recognizable by their augmetic enhancements, where most of the crew retain essentially human forms despite whatever scars and injuries they accumulate. The tech priests have deliberately replaced portions of their flesh with machinery. Mechadendrites, serpentine mechanical tentacles, sprout from their backs, each one tipped with different tools for different tasks. Their eyes have been replaced with optical sensors that can perceive spectra of light invisible to normal human vision. Their arms may end not in hands, but in multi-tools, plasma cutters, or manipulator claws. Their voices carry the mechanical buzz of vox synthesizers, and their thoughts are augmented by cogitators implanted directly into their skulls. This extensive augmentation serves multiple purposes. Practically, it enhances their ability to interface with and repair the ship's systems. A tech priest with the proper mechadendrites can reach into spaces too small or dangerous for human hands, perform delicate repairs, while simultaneously monitoring system readouts through their optical sensors, and maintain the stamina necessary for repairs that might take days or weeks of constant effort. But augmentation is also theological, a physical manifestation of the tech priest's belief that flesh is weak and the machine is pure. Each replacement of organic tissue with blessed metal is a step closer to the Omnissiah, a shedding of human frailty in favor of mechanical perfection. The relationship between the tech priests and the ship's machine spirits is central to everything they do. From the perspective of the Adeptus Mechanicus, the machine spirits are real, living presences that inhabit the ship's systems. These spirits can be benevolent or malevolent, depending on how they are treated, and they respond to ritual and prayer in much the same way that humans respond to social interaction. A machine spirit that is properly honored, that receives the correct sequences of oil blessings and incense burning and chanted catechisms, will function reliably and efficiently. A machine spirit that is neglected or insulted through improper maintenance will become temperamental, causing systems to malfunction or fail at critical moments. The rituals performed by the tech priests follow patterns established over millennia, sacred procedures that have been passed down through generations and refined through countless iterations. When activating a plasma drive, for instance, the process does not simply involve pushing buttons and pulling levers. It begins with the application of sanctified oils to key components, each drop placed precisely according to diagrams that show the machine spirit's preferred locations. Incense must be burned, the smoke filling the chamber and presumably pleasing to the spirit's senses. Hymns must be chanted in binary cant, the sacred language of the Mechanicus, praising the machine spirit and requesting its cooperation. Only after these rituals have been completed, following the prescribed sequences without deviation, will the tech priest proceed to the actual technical activation. And even then, they do so with prayers on their lips, asking the machine spirit to awaken and serve the Omnissiah's will. To an outside observer, particularly one trained in more secular traditions of technology, this might seem like superstition, an elaborate performance with no actual effect on the machinery. But the tech priests know better. They have seen machines that were activated without proper ritual fail for no discernible reason. They have witnessed equipment that should have been broken continue to function because its machine spirit was particularly devoted. They know that the spirits are real, even if those spirits cannot be quantified or measured by conventional means. The tech priests move through the ship in small groups or individually, depending on the nature of their work. They are everywhere that machinery exists, which is to say, everywhere aboard the vessel. In the plasma drive chambers, where temperatures rise to levels that would instantly incinerate unprotected flesh, tech priests monitor the massive reactors that provide the ship's power. In the gun decks, they maintain the enormous macro cannons and lance batteries, ensuring that each weapon is properly sighted and its machine spirit properly honored before battle. In the life support systems, they tend to the air recyclers and water purifiers that keep the crew alive in the hostile environment of the void. The average crew member's interactions with tech priests are limited and often uncomfortable. The extensive augmentation makes tech priests seem more machine than human, and their devotion to their strange religion sets them apart from the crew's more conventional Imperial faith. When a tech priest arrives to repair a malfunctioning system, the crew members working in that area will typically stand back and wait, not because they are forbidden from helping, but because they understand that their untrained interference might insult the machine spirit and make the problem worse. The tech priests, for their part, often view the rest of the crew with a mixture of pity and contempt. These are beings who have rejected the perfection of augmentation, who cling to their weak flesh even as it fails them. They lack the knowledge to properly commune with machine spirits, performing their duties through brute force and rote repetition rather than true understanding. Yet the tech priests also recognize that the crew is necessary, that even the most automated ship requires human operators to make the decisions that cogitators cannot. This creates an uneasy cooperation, each side dependent on the other, but divided by fundamental differences in worldview. When serious damage occurs, whether from enemy action or simple mechanical failure, the tech priests spring into action with practiced efficiency. Emergency repair teams, led by more experienced tech priests and supported by servitors and trained ratings, rush to the affected areas. They carry with them not just tools, but also the sacred unguents and blessed components necessary to perform proper repairs. A tech priest repairing a broken conduit does not simply replace the damaged section. They first anoint the surrounding machinery with oils, speak prayers of apology to the machine spirit for whatever caused the damage, and perform specific rituals designed to reassure the spirit that the repair is being conducted by those who understand and respect it. The pace of these repairs can seem frustratingly slow to officers who do not understand the religious necessity of proper procedure. A captain demanding that a critical system be brought back online immediately may find themselves explaining to the senior engineer that rushing the rituals will only anger the machine spirit further. This creates tension, particularly in combat situations where time is critical and every moment of delay might mean the difference between victory and destruction. The wise captain learns to trust the tech priest's judgment, understanding that a repair performed correctly might take longer, but will be more reliable than a rushed job that satisfies immediate needs while storing up trouble for the future. The tech priests maintain workshops throughout the ship, sacred spaces where they perform maintenance and create the blessed components necessary for ongoing operations. These workshops are filled with machinery whose purpose might be obscure to outsiders, lathes and forges, cogitator banks running endless calculations, storage chambers filled with components ranging from simple bolts to complex circuit boards. The workshops smell of hot metal and sacred oils, and the air vibrates with the hum of machinery and the chanting of litanies. Servitors form an essential part of the tech priest's workforce. These lobotomized humans, their higher brain functions removed and replaced with simple programming, perform tasks that are too dangerous or too tedious for fully conscious beings. They haul heavy components, hold positions for extended periods without tiring, and operate in environments where even augmented tech priests cannot safely go. The servitors are created from a variety of sources. Criminals whose sentences involve transformation into servitors, volunteers from among the most devout members of the Mechanicus, who view servitor conversion as the ultimate expression of faith, and occasionally crew members who were so severely injured that servitor conversion was the only alternative to death. The creation of new servitors is performed in specialized medical bays, sterile environments where tech priests with medical training perform the delicate surgeries required to remove a person's higher brain functions, while leaving intact the portions that control basic motor function and the ability to follow simple commands. Augmetic limbs are installed, often replacing perfectly functional organic limbs, because machine parts are more reliable and easier to maintain. Programming is loaded directly into the servitor's brain via cranial sockets, giving them the skills and knowledge needed for their designated functions. To the uninitiated, the servitor workshops might seem like chambers of horrors, places where human beings are reduced to biological machines through procedures that bear more resemblance to assembly line production than medical care. And perhaps there is truth in this perception. But the tech priests view it differently. They see servitor conversion as an honor, a transformation that allows even the unworthy to serve the Omnissiah in purity of purpose. A servitor does not question, does not doubt, does not fail through error or emotion. It simply serves, and in that service finds a kind of perfection that fully conscious humans can never achieve. The maintenance of the ship's machine spirits is a never-ending duty. Even when the ship is not in combat, even when all systems are functioning nominally, the tech priests continue their rounds. They perform preventive maintenance, replacing components before they fail. They conduct ritual observances at scheduled intervals, ensuring that each major machine spirit receives regular attention and appeasement. They update cogitator databases, cross-referencing current performance data with historical records to identify patterns that might indicate developing problems. This work is made more complicated by the age of many Imperial ships. Some battleships have been in service for thousands of years, their construction dating back to eras when the Imperium's technical capabilities were greater than they are in the current age. These ancient vessels often incorporate technologies that are no longer fully understood, systems that function through principles that modern tech priests can only guess at. Such systems are maintained through careful preservation of rituals passed down from generation to generation. Tech priests performing procedures whose purpose they do not entirely understand because historical records show that these procedures work. When completely new problems arise, problems for which no established ritual exists, the tech priests must improvise. This is dangerous work, for innovation is viewed with deep suspicion by the Mechanicus orthodoxy. The proper way to address a new problem is to research extensively, consulting ancient texts and STC fragments to find guidance from the past. Only when no historical precedent can be found should a tech priest attempt to devise new rituals or procedures. And even then, such innovations must be carefully tested and documented so that they can be submitted to higher authority for approval. Yet sometimes circumstances demand immediate action, and tech priests who serve aboard military vessels must develop a certain flexibility that their counterparts working in the controlled environments of Forge worlds might never need. A tech priest trying to keep a damaged ship functional during an extended campaign cannot always wait for approval from Mars before improvising a repair. They must trust their own understanding of machine spirits and mechanical principles to guide them in creating new rituals that will appease the spirits of damaged or modified systems. This creates a fascinating dynamic where the tech priests aboard long-serving battleships develop their own localized traditions, ritual variations specific to their vessel that might differ significantly from standard Mechanicus doctrine. These ship-specific traditions are passed down when new tech priests are assigned to the vessel, creating lineages of knowledge that exist parallel to, but distinct from the wider Mechanicus hierarchy. The senior engineers who cultivate these traditions walk a fine line, maintaining their orthodox credentials, while also acknowledging the practical necessities of keeping an ancient warship operational in conditions far from the support of Forge worlds. The tech priests also serve as a repository of knowledge about the ship's history. Many have access to records that date back centuries or millennia, maintenance logs that detail every significant repair, upgrade, or modification the vessel has undergone. They know which systems are original construction and which have been replaced, sometimes multiple times. They can trace the evolution of the ship's configuration, explaining how it came to have its current layout and capabilities. This historical knowledge is valuable not just for maintenance purposes, but also for understanding the ship's performance characteristics and limitations. In battle, the tech priest's role becomes even more critical. Damage control teams led by tech priests rush to seal hull breaches, repair damaged systems, and keep the ship fighting, even as enemy fire continues to pound against its shields and armor. They work in conditions that would terrify any sane person. Compartments exposed to vacuum, machinery torn apart and leaking plasma, or more exotic substances. Fires raging out of control because the suppression systems have been damaged. The tech priests move through this chaos with grim determination, their augmentations providing them some protection against the hazards, but by no means making them invincible. Many tech priests die in battle, crushed by collapsing bulkheads, or consumed by plasma fires, or sucked out into the void, when hull breaches occur faster than emergency seals can close. Their deaths are mourned by their fellow tech priests, but also celebrated in a sense, for they died in service to the Omnissiah and the machine they had sworn to maintain. New tech priests will be requisitioned from the Mechanicus to replace the fallen, and the cycle continues, generation after generation of machine worshippers giving their lives to keep the great ships operational. The relationship between faith and function in the tech priest's work remains a source of endless debate among those who care about such things. Are the machine spirits real? Is the religious element of tech priest maintenance actually necessary, Or is it simply a highly ritualized way of ensuring that proper procedures are followed? Do the prayers and oil blessings actually affect the machinery, or are they merely cultural practices that have become inseparable from the technical knowledge they accompany? The tech priests themselves have no doubt. They have seen too much, experienced too many incidents that defy rational explanation to question the reality of machine spirits. They know that their faith works, that the rituals produce results, and that is sufficient. Whether their understanding of the underlying mechanisms is correct or not matters less than the fact that their methods successfully maintain technology that would otherwise decay into unusability. In the grim darkness of the far future, where dogma and desperation intertwine, the tech priest's faith in the machine god and its manifestations is as essential to the Imperium's survival as the ships they maintain. Daily life in the depths, the lower decks. To understand life aboard an Imperial battleship, you must first understand that for the vast majority of the crew, existence is defined by the lower decks. These are not the gleaming corridors of the command levels, where officers stride purposefully beneath vaulted ceilings and lighting remains consistent and bright. These are the working sections, the guts of the ship where the real labor happens, where tens or hundreds of thousands of souls toil in conditions that vary from merely uncomfortable to actively hazardous. The lower decks are a maze. Corridors twist and branch in patterns that seem deliberately designed to confuse, the original ship's layout having been modified and extended over centuries or millennia of operation. What was once an external bulkhead might now be buried deep within the ship after additional sections were added to the hull. Spaces that began as storage chambers might have been converted to crew quarters or workshops, then converted again and again until their original purpose is lost to memory. To navigate these depths requires either extensive experience or the guidance of those who were born here and know the passages as well as you might know the rooms of your childhood home. Lighting in the lower decks is inconsistent at best. The official illumination sources, lumen strips running along the ceilings or walls, often fail and may go unreplaced for weeks or months until someone with sufficient authority notices and orders repairs. The crew adapts, bringing their own portable lamps or simply learning to navigate by touch and memory through sections that have been dark for longer than anyone can remember. In some areas, the only light comes from the glow of machinery, casting strange shadows and making the corridors seem even more alien and threatening. The air itself is different in the lower decks. Recycling systems work constantly to process the exhalations of tens of thousands of crew members, removing carbon dioxide and other contaminants while adding fresh oxygen. But these systems were designed for efficiency rather than comfort, and the air often carries strange tastes and smells. There is the metallic tang of too much iron content, the acrid bite of chemical additives, the underlying note of human sweat and unwashed bodies pressed into spaces too small for their numbers. In sections near the plasma drives or other heat-generating equipment, the air becomes thick and heavy, difficult to breathe even for crew members acclimated to the ship's environment. Temperature varies wildly throughout the lower decks based on proximity to different systems. Near the engines and reactor chambers, the heat can be overwhelming, with crew members working in nothing but thin undershirts and still dripping with sweat within minutes of beginning their shifts. In sections far from heat sources, particularly those near the outer hull, where the void's cold penetrates despite layers of armor and insulation, the crew must bundle in whatever warm clothing they can scrounge or trade for. The ship's environmental systems attempt to maintain consistent temperatures, but in a structure 8 kilometers long with millions of cubic meters of interior space, perfect climate control is an impossible dream. Noise is constant and all-pervading in the lower decks. The ship never truly rests. Machinery runs continuously, creating a symphony of mechanical sounds that forms the background to all activity. There is the deep thrumming of the plasma drives, felt more than heard, vibrating through the deck plates beneath your feet. There is the hiss and clank of coolant systems, the whir of ventilation fans, the random clangs and bangs as components shift and settle. In some sections, the noise is loud enough that crew members must wear ear protection or risk permanent hearing damage. In others, it is merely a constant presence, something you learn to ignore, but that shapes your experience nonetheless. The crew quarters for the lower deck workers vary enormously depending on rank and position, but even the best of them would seem crowded and squalid to anyone accustomed to planetary living conditions. The common ratings typically sleep in dormitories, large chambers filled with bunks stacked 3 or even 4 high. These bunks are narrow, barely wider than a single person, with just enough space for a crew member to lie on their back. There is no privacy, no personal space beyond the bunk itself, and perhaps a small locker where possessions can be secured. The dormitories house anywhere from dozens to hundreds of crew members, creating an environment of constant noise and activity. Someone is always awake, either returning from a shift or preparing for one, and the sounds of their movements echo through the chamber. Snoring, coughing, the mumbled words of those experiencing nightmares, the occasional argument or fight between crew members who have rubbed each other wrong. All of these form the soundscape of sleep in the lower decks. The bunks themselves are not particularly comfortable. The mattresses, such as they are, consist of thin foam pads that do little to cushion the hard surface beneath. Blankets are worn and often inadequate, particularly in the colder sections of the ship. Crew members who have served long enough typically acquire additional layers through trade or salvage, building up a nest of fabric that provides some insulation and comfort. The bunks smell of sweat and unwashed bodies, for bathing facilities are limited and heavily rationed. Speaking of hygiene, this is perhaps one of the most challenging aspects of lower deck life. Water is precious aboard a ship, even a ship as large as a battleship. Every drop must be recycled, processed through filtration systems that remove contaminants and render it safe for drinking or washing. But the supply is never quite sufficient for the needs of the crew, and strict rationing is enforced. A common rating might be allocated enough water for a brief shower once a week, and even that water will be lukewarm at best, often cold, dispensed through shower heads that produce more of a drizzle than a proper spray. The washing facilities themselves are communal and unpleasant. Large chambers with multiple shower heads, no privacy screens or dividers, crew members standing shoulder to shoulder as they attempt to scrub away the accumulated grime of their duties. The soap provided is harsh and industrial, more effective at stripping away oils than providing any kind of pleasant experience. Many crew members develop skin conditions, rashes and sores that come from the combination of harsh soap, infrequent washing, and the constant irritation of working in dirty conditions. Toilets are similarly communal and even less pleasant. Rows of simple seats over disposal chutes, no stalls or doors. Crew members conducting their business in full view of their fellows. The smell in these facilities is predictably awful. Ventilation struggling to keep up with the biological needs of hundreds or thousands of users. Bondsmen and the lowest ranks might have to share facilities, even more crude, simple buckets that are emptied periodically into the ship's waste processing systems. The food provided to the lower deck crew is nutritious in the technical sense, but hardly appetizing. The standard ration for a common rating consists largely of corpse starch, that infamous grey paste made from recycled organic matter, including, allegedly, the bodies of dead crew members. Whether this allegation is true varies by ship and by circumstances. On some vessels, corpse starch is indeed made partially from human remains, the bodies of the dead being too valuable a resource to waste when food is scarce. On others, the starch comes from vegetable matter and synthetic proteins, but the name persists because no one can entirely shake the suspicion of what might be in the paste. Corpse starch can be processed into various forms. Sometimes it comes as a paste straight from the tin, to be eaten with a spoon or spread on hard biscuits that are only slightly more appealing than the starch itself. Sometimes it is pressed into bars or cakes that can be carried and eaten during shifts. Occasionally, for variety, it might be mixed with water and other ingredients to create something approaching soup or stew, though the result is unlikely to remind anyone of actual cuisine. The taste of corpse starch is uniformly described as unpleasant. It carries a flat, vaguely metallic flavor, with an aftertaste that lingers unpleasantly. The texture is sometimes gritty, sometimes too smooth, never quite right. Crew members learn to eat it because the alternative is starvation, but no one pretends to enjoy it. Those with connections or resources might supplement their rations through trade, acquiring items smuggled aboard from port worlds or produced in the ship's own agricultural sections, if it has any. A piece of actual fruit, a bit of real meat, even chocolate or a sweet. These luxuries can command impressive prices in the lower deck economy. Meals are taken in shifts in communal dining halls, large spaces filled with long tables and benches where crew members gather to consume their rations and rest briefly before returning to duty. The dining halls are loud and crowded, filled with the sounds of hundreds of conversations, arguments, occasional fights. They are also one of the few places where crew members from different sections might interact, creating opportunities for the social bonds and informal networks that help make life in the lower decks bearable. The work itself, the actual duties that fill a crew member's waking hours, varies enormously depending on assignment, but is universally demanding. Gun crews might spend their shifts hauling shells the size of ground cars into firing chambers, work that requires teams of dozens coordinating their efforts to move and position each enormous projectile. The shells are heavy beyond what seems possible, and even with mechanical assistance, moving them requires strength and coordination. A crew member who slips, who fails to maintain their grip at the crucial moment, might be crushed as tons of metal fall on them. Engine room crews work in heat that is almost unbearable, monitoring the plasma drives and reactor systems that power the ship. These crew members are responsible for fuel feeding, for monitoring temperature and pressure gauges, for adjusting flows to match the demands placed on the ship's systems by navigation and combat. The work is endless, for the engines never truly rest, and it is dangerous. For a mistake in these sections can result in explosions, radiation leaks, or plasma fires that consume everything in their path. Maintenance crews crawl through the bowels of the ship, accessing ventilation ducts, coolant systems, power conduits, all the infrastructure that keeps the ship functional. They work in spaces that were not designed for human occupation, tight passages where you must crawl on hands and knees or slither on your belly, where the wrong movement might leave you stuck until a rescue team can extract you if one can be spared. They breathe air thick with dust and chemical fumes, their hands torn by sharp edges and rough surfaces, their bodies aching from the contortions required to reach the components they must service. The shifts are long, typically 12 hours on and 12 off, though this can be extended during emergencies or combat operations. A crew member who completes their shift does not return to rest immediately. They must first navigate back to their quarters through the maze of corridors, often a journey of many minutes or even hours if they work in a particularly distant section. Then they must attend to their personal needs, eating if a meal is available, washing if their allotment permits, perhaps mending worn clothing or equipment. Only after all this can they finally collapse into their bunk for what sleep they can manage before the cycle begins again. There is no such thing as time off in the conventional sense, no weekends or holidays for the crew of an Imperial battleship. Service is continuous until death or discharge, which amounts to the same thing for those pressed into service or born aboard. The closest thing to rest comes during travel through quiet sectors, when the ship is not in combat and system demands are at their lowest. During such times, the crews might have marginally more time to themselves, a few extra hours before the next shift begins. They use this time in various ways, depending on their inclinations and opportunities. Gambling is endemic throughout the lower decks. Card games and dice, betting on everything from shift assignments to the outcomes of battles, currency changing hands in the form of ration tickets, small luxuries, or IOUs that bind crew members into webs of debt and obligation. The ship's authorities officially discourage gambling, but enforcement is sporadic at best. As long as the games do not interfere with duties and do not lead to serious violence, most officers are content to look the other way. Alcohol, when it can be obtained, provides another form of escape. Some ships have official rations of immersive or other spirits dispensed to the crew in small quantities. Others have thriving illegal stills hidden in forgotten sections, producing liquor from whatever organic matter can be fermented. The quality of such spirits is generally terrible, but the effects are the same. A few hours of numbness, a temporary dulling of the grinding misery that characterizes lower deck existence. Religion provides comfort for many. The ship's chaplain conducts regular services, and crew members gather to pray and sing hymns praising the God Emperor. These services offer a rare moment of community and shared purpose, a reminder that their suffering is not meaningless, but rather service to something greater than themselves. The most devout might spend their free time in additional prayers, seeking the Emperor's guidance and protection. Shrines are scattered throughout the lower decks, small alcoves where crew members have placed offerings and icons, spaces that become focal points for private devotion. But the reality is that for many crew members, there is little time or energy for anything beyond survival. They work until exhaustion, collapse into their bunks, sleep fitfully, and wake to begin the cycle again. Days blend into weeks, weeks into months, months into years. The ship becomes their entire universe, a world of metal and machinery, where the outside is something remembered dimly or not at all, where the very concept of planetary life seems like a fever dream. The mortality rate among lower deck crew is sobering. Industrial accidents claim dozens or hundreds annually aboard even well-run ships. Machinery malfunctions, crushing or burning or poisoning those unfortunate enough to be nearby. Crew members fall from heights, misjudging distances or losing their footing. They succumb to diseases that spread rapidly in the crowded, unsanitary conditions. During combat, the lower decks suffer disproportionately as damage spreads through the ship's infrastructure. Bulkheads collapsing and systems failing, and crew members dying by the dozens or hundreds or thousands. Yet despite all this, the crew endures. They form bonds with their fellows, friendships and rivalries that provide structure to their existence. They develop expertise in their roles, taking pride in work well done, even when that work is brutal and dangerous. They maintain the ship, this impossibly vast machine that carries them between the stars, knowing that their efforts, however small in the grand scheme of things, are essential to the vessel's continued function. The lower decks are a world unto themselves, separate from the officers above and the void without. They are a place of constant struggle, where every day demands everything you have simply to survive. They are a place where hope is a rare commodity, and comfort is measured in the smallest increments. An extra hour of sleep, a slightly better meal, a warm spot to rest your aching bones. They are the foundation upon which the entire ship rests, the millions of hands and backs and hearts that keep the great machine functioning despite the impossible demands placed upon it. And in this crucible of hardship, the crew finds a kind of resilience that outsiders might struggle to understand. They are not heroes in the conventional sense, not celebrated, warriors who receive medals and glory. They are simply people doing impossibly difficult work because they have no other choice, surviving because the alternative is unthinkable, maintaining their humanity in an environment that seems designed to crush it out of them. Their story is not recorded in the official histories, their names not inscribed on monuments. But without them, the Imperium itself would cease to function, and in that truth lies a kind of honor that no amount of suffering can erase. Arms and armsmen, the ship's defenders. A battleship is not merely a vehicle for travel or a platform for weapons. It is a fortress, a mobile stronghold that must be capable of defending itself not just against external enemies, but against threats from within. To fulfill this dual role, every Imperial battleship maintains a force of armsmen, soldiers whose primary duty is the defense of the vessel and the enforcement of order among its vast crew. These men and women occupy a unique position in the ship's hierarchy, respected for their martial skills, but also feared for the authority they wield over their fellow crew members. The title armsman is somewhat misleading to those familiar with more conventional military terminology. These are not simply Marines or soldiers embarked aboard ship. They are void warfare specialists, trained specifically for the unique challenges of combat in the confines of a spacecraft. They must know how to fight in zero gravity, how to navigate corridors filled with smoke and fire, how to respond to sudden hull breaches that expose entire sections to vacuum. They are masters of close-quarters battle, experts with shotgun and pistol and power maul, disciplined enough to maintain formation even when the ship is being torn apart around them. The total number of armsmen aboard a battleship varies depending on the vessel's size and the captain's priorities, but it is always substantial. A ship carrying 200,000 crew members might have 10,000 armsmen, a force comparable in size to some planetary militaries. These armsmen are organized along military lines, divided into companies and platoons and squads, each with its own command structure that parallels but remains separate from the ship's general hierarchy. The Master-at-Arms stands at the apex of this force, a senior officer whose authority over the armsmen is absolute. They answer directly to the captain, serving as the primary advisor on all matters related to internal security and boarding operations. The Master-at-Arms is typically a grizzled veteran who has seen more combat than most crew members can imagine, someone whose experience spans decades and whose tactical acumen has been proven in the crucible of void warfare. They are part soldier, part administrator, part judge, responsible for maintaining discipline among their own forces, while also coordinating with other departments to ensure the ship's overall security. The armsmen themselves are drawn from various sources. Some are volunteers who enlisted specifically for this duty, attracted by the promise of better conditions and more prestige than ordinary ratings enjoy. Others are former Imperial Guard soldiers who transferred to naval service, bringing with them the experience and discipline forged in planetary campaigns. Still others might be pressed crew members who demonstrated aptitude for combat and were recruited into the armsmen to fill gaps in the roster. Regardless of their origins, all armsmen undergo intensive training that transforms them into specialists capable of operating in the unique environment of a warship. Their training emphasizes not just marksmanship and close combat skills, but also the mental discipline necessary to function in the most chaotic conditions imaginable. They practice fighting in darkness, in smoke, in sections where artificial gravity has failed, and every movement must account for the laws of physics operating differently. They train in emergency response, learning how to seal hull breaches and contain fires and evacuate damaged sections under enemy fire. They study the layout of their ship obsessively, memorizing every corridor and hatch and emergency route, knowing that in combat they might need to navigate while blind or injured or both. The equipment provided to armsmen reflects their specialized role. Their armor is heavier than what ordinary crew members wear, but lighter than the power armor of Space Marines, a compromise between protection and mobility. Void-capable suits allow them to operate in hard vacuum when necessary, sealed systems keeping them alive even when corridors are exposed to space. Their weapons are selected for reliability and effectiveness in confined spaces. Shotguns that can blast through bulkheads or tear through unarmored enemies. Bolt pistols whose mass-reactive shells explode inside targets. Power mauls that can stun or kill with crackling energy fields. They also carry an array of specialized equipment: breaching charges for blowing through locked hatches, grapnels for navigating between hull sections in zero gravity, cutting torches for creating new passages through damaged areas. Each piece of equipment has its place in the armsman's loadout, selected based on lessons learned through centuries of void warfare, and every armsman knows how to use their gear with practiced efficiency. The daily routine of an armsman when the ship is not in combat consists of constant drilling and patrolling. They practice the maneuvers and techniques that will keep them alive when battle comes, running through simulated boarding actions and defensive scenarios until the responses become automatic. They patrol the ship's corridors in squads, a visible presence that reminds the rest of the crew that order is maintained through armed force as much as through loyalty or discipline. These patrols serve multiple purposes, deterring would-be criminals or malcontents, while also familiarizing the armsmen with the current state of their assigned sections. The armsmen are authorized to enforce discipline among the crew, though in practice most minor infractions are handled by warrant officers, rather than requiring armsman intervention. But when serious crimes occur, theft or assault, or the gravest sin of heresy, it is the armsmen who respond. They have the authority to arrest any crew member regardless of rank, though wise armsmen know to be very careful when dealing with officers or specialists whose positions give them political protection. Suspected heretics are detained and turned over to the chaplain or commissar for investigation, a process that might result in execution or mind-wiping depending on the severity of the offense. When boarding actions are required, either to defend against enemy boarders or to assault an enemy vessel, the armsmen truly come into their element. This is the role they train for most intensively, the ultimate expression of their purpose aboard the ship. Boarding actions in void warfare are brutal, chaotic affairs where every advantage must be pressed and every mistake can be fatal. The armsmen prepare for such actions with grim determination, checking and rechecking their equipment, offering prayers to the Emperor for protection and victory, steeling themselves for what they know will be a savage struggle in the worst conditions imaginable. Defensive boarding actions occur when an enemy vessel successfully launches boarding torpedoes or attack craft that attach to the ship's hull and discharge their cargo of enemy soldiers. The armsmen respond to such incursions with everything at their disposal, rushing to the breach points before the enemy can establish a foothold. They set up kill zones in the corridors leading away from the breach, using cover and crossfire to slaughter the enemy as they emerge. They employ welding equipment to seal hatches behind the enemy, trapping them in sections that can then be vented to space or filled with poison gas. The close quarters nature of these fights means casualties are inevitable. Shotguns bark and power mauls crackle, and bodies fall on both sides as armsmen and enemy soldiers struggle for control of corridors and chambers. The armsmen have the advantage of knowing the ship's layout, able to use hidden routes and maintenance tunnels to outflank their opponents. But the enemy often has the advantage of desperation, knowing that retreat is impossible and that victory is their only hope of survival. Offensive boarding actions require the armsmen to board enemy vessels, a prospect that combines all the dangers of void warfare with the added challenge of operating in unfamiliar territory. The armsmen load into boarding torpedoes, cramped metal tubes that are essentially giant missiles with armored prows designed to punch through enemy hulls. The experience of being launched in one of these torpedoes is a special kind of terror, trapped in darkness while the torpedo accelerates toward its target, hoping that the enemy's defensive weapons will not blow you to atoms before you arrive, praying that the torpedo's melter charges will successfully breach the hull and not simply splatter you against an unyielding surface. If the torpedo successfully penetrates, the armsmen burst from it into the enemy ship, entering through the hole blown in their hull. They spread out immediately, forming defensive perimeters and securing the breach point against counterattack. From there, they push deeper into the enemy vessel, fighting their way toward critical targets, the bridge, the engine rooms, the life support systems. The goal is to capture or kill the enemy crew, to disable the ship's ability to fight or flee, to claim it as a prize for the Imperium, or simply ensure its destruction. These offensive actions are where the armsmen suffer their highest casualties. Enemy crews have every reason to fight to the last, knowing that surrender might mean execution or enslavement. The confined spaces of a ship favor defensive tactics, allowing small forces to hold choke points against larger numbers. Traps and ambushes are common, the enemy using their knowledge of their own ship's layout to deadly advantage. Many boarding actions end with both sides suffering such horrific casualties that the ships involved are left crippled and their crews decimated. The psychological toll of service as an armsman is considerable. They live with the knowledge that death in combat is not merely possible, but likely, that each boarding action they survive is simply another step toward the one that will kill them. They witness horrors that would break civilians, the aftermath of battles fought in corridors, now slick with blood and littered with bodies, the terrible wounds inflicted by weapons designed to kill as efficiently as possible, the screams of injured comrades who cannot be saved. Yet they also develop bonds of brotherhood that are impossible to replicate outside of combat. They trust their squad mates absolutely, knowing that these are the people who will guard their back and pull them from danger if possible. They take pride in their unit's achievements, in battles won and threats overcome. They maintain traditions and rituals that connect them to the generations of armsmen who served before them, creating a sense of continuity and purpose that helps sustain them through the worst moments. The relationship between armsmen and the rest of the crew is complex. The crew recognizes that the armsmen are necessary, that someone must defend the ship when enemies come calling, but they also resent the power the armsmen hold over them. An armsman squad patrolling through a working section is a reminder that they live under armed guard, that their movements are watched and their behavior scrutinized. Yet when battle comes, when the enemy is at the gates, those same crew members will be profoundly grateful for the armsman's presence, for the knowledge that skilled fighters stand between them and whatever horrors the enemy might unleash. The armsman barracks, where they are housed when not on duty, occupy sections of the ship that are distinctly better than the common crew quarters. They have their own dining facilities, serving marginally better food, their own training halls where they can practice without interference from other crew members, their own chapels where they offer prayers specific to their calling. This separation serves practical purposes, keeping the armsmen together where they can respond quickly to emergencies, but it also reinforces their status as separate from and above the ordinary crew. Among the armsmen there develops a culture all its own, with traditions and slang and unwritten rules that govern behavior. Veterans are respected for their experience and the scars they carry, physical proof of battles survived. New recruits are tested, hazed in ways both harsh and educational, transformed from raw material into reliable members of the unit. Unit cohesion is everything, and those who fail to integrate, who cannot be trusted to hold their positions or follow orders, are quietly reassigned, or, in extreme cases, eliminated before they can endanger their comrades. The armsmen also serve another crucial function. They are the visible embodiment of the captain's authority. When the captain issues an order, it is the armsmen who enforce it if necessary. When discipline must be maintained, it is the armsmen who stand ready with weapons and authority. The fact that the armsmen are respected and feared in roughly equal measure by the rest of the crew is not an accident, but rather a deliberate feature of their role. They are the thin line between order and chaos, the force that keeps thousands or hundreds of thousands of crew members from descending into mutiny or anarchy when conditions become unbearable. In the end, the armsmen are defenders in the truest sense, protecting not just against external enemies, but against the internal collapse that constant threatens any organization this large operating under such extreme conditions. They are the Emperor's chosen warriors aboard the ship, entrusted with the sacred duty of maintaining order and security through force when necessary. And while their service might not earn them the glory accorded to Imperial Guard regiments or Space Marine chapters, it is no less essential to the Imperium's survival. For what good is a battleship, no matter how heavily armed or well crewed, if it cannot defend itself when battle is joined? The armsmen ensure that question never needs to be answered, standing ready at all times to meet any threat with disciplined violence and unwavering courage. The weapons of war, macro cannons and more, an Imperial battleship is first and foremost a weapon, a mobile platform designed to project devastating force across the void. To understand life aboard such a vessel, one must understand the weapons themselves, their size, their power, their operation, and the crew required to make them function. These are not the simple point-and-shoot weapons.